good morning, everybody, and welcome to Beginner's Mind Temple. Those of you who are in the room and those of you who are in the Zoom room, wherever you may be, whatever time zone or part of the world. It's a beautiful summer day in San Francisco. It's too nice a day to be wearing robes, if you ask me. Thank you, Tim, the Tanto, for inviting me to give the talk. Thank you to my teacher, Anshi Zachary Smith, and the many other teachers I've had. Thank you, David, for holding everything together. So it's kind of an auspicious time of year. I think we've just passed the solstice. I think we had the strawberry new moon the other day as well. So we're in the height of summer, which of course means in San Francisco it was cold and foggy and windy last night, but very beautiful today. We just had Juneteenth this week, and we have Pride next weekend. So the festivals of liberation, the struggles for liberation that people have. I know this is the last talk that's going to be given in this zendo before it closes down for its part of the renovation works that have been going on at City Center all year. So it's a very, perhaps a poignant moment, perhaps a moment for reflection. And as it happens, I've also been moving house this week. I lived just up the road from here, and pretty much all I left behind this week was my robes and bowls and a bunch of trash, which I'm going to go and clean up this afternoon before I hand over the keys on Monday. So obviously I've been reflecting on home and house, because how is it if a temple doesn't have a zendo? Is a temple still a home without a zendo? So those are going to be some of my reflections today. I want to start with an exchange from Suzuki Roshi that I'll talk about as we go through the talk. So this was an exchange with a student at Tassajara, and the student says, "Roshi, how is it that we can feel we've lost our home and that we make what we think is a journey to return to it?" And Suzuki Roshi says in his very distinctive English, "Your feeling is opposite. You think you started your journey from home, but real home is here. Don't go wandering about to various countries." And the student says, "Why is it that we do that?" Suzuki Roshi replies, "Because you feel you started your journey from your home, which is not true home. You must feel as if you came back to your home right now." And so what is home? If I say home to you and you close your eyes, what do you picture? Where is it? What does it feel like? What does it look like? For many years, this temple was my home, a temporary home. And I had the erroneous impression, actually, that two of the places that were my rooms, almost my first and last room, were actually being demolished as part of the elevator scheme, but apparently that's not the case. But the thought that, maybe, those rooms won't exist anymore, and the feeling of losing something. And when I was thinking about this, I remembered a quote from the book Fire Monks about the Tassajara fire in 2008. And there was a story where one of the monks was asked, well, what would be left if all of Tassajara burnt down? And the reply was, Tassajara. So things may change. We may lose or have transformed the places we call dear, the places we call home. But alongside the changing, the unchanging coexists right there as well. And so, having spent most of the last week moving, logistics were keeping me awake in the middle of the night, and combining two households into one and moving things from one place to another. And I noticed that, even after 25 years of meditation, my mind still wants to solve problems. It woke me up in the middle of the night, and I couldn't get back to sleep because I was trying to solve problems. And that caused more problems because I was barely functional the next day when we had to do a lot of the heavy lifting. Why is it that the mind is so busy trying to sort everything out? And I was interested in the language between moving house and moving home. So if I say moving home, what comes up for me is moving back to my childhood home. Where you grew up. That sense of moving back to a place. When we talk about moving house, we don't talk about moving home so much. And I lived in the same house for the whole time I was growing up. And I guess if I was asked, where is my home, that would be one answer, the house I grew up in. But then a couple of weeks ago, I was up at Great Vow Monastery, which I'll talk about again later on. And they have beautiful woods on the property. And during a little free time, I was walking in the woods. And the feeling there reminded me of the woods that were close to the house where I grew up, where I was allowed to roam freely from an early age. And I remembered that feeling of being at home in the woods, as much as I was at home in the house. The woods were a wonderful place for me to be creative and be imaginative and to be free. Nobody was supervising me in those days. And I think about my family now. My mother is aging somewhat, and between my visit to England last year and my visit this year, she's been moved into a nursing home. And we say nursing home, and what kind of home is that? Is that a place that she feels at home? And when I visited her, the most important thing was just to be there, to be present, to show that I loved her in that moment, however our paths have been. Just to be there, making that moment a home. My father died a few years ago, and the home that he had was not where I grew up, but it was down in Cornwall, in the southwest of England. And it's a place where I felt a deep sense of home, because one side of the family had been there for many hundreds of years, we know. And so I felt this deep ancestral connection to this place, the house and the area around it. Then after he died, we had to sell that home. And I realized that part of home was kind of gone, or maybe not. I can still visit and feel that sense of connection. And I know that people often talk about the sense of coming home when they come to Zen Center. When they arrive in the building, they sit on the cushion. Something about this place, this practice, allows them to feel at home, allows them to find this place within themselves that feels maybe grounded and settled, maybe a sense of integration. And I think I felt that also at Tassajara, deep in the mountains. It was not a landscape that I was familiar with from what I grew up with in England, but there was a sense of being in a place that was a home, deep in the mountains, deep in the wilderness, even though it's always a temporary home. And now here at Zen Center, the elders, who have called this place home for 30 or 40 years are moving on, handing on the power and authority to those in the next generation. And I think there's maybe fewer of us in this generation and the subsequent generations that will make Zen Center their home in the same way that the pioneers did in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And so back to this quote from Suzuki Roshi, and just to point out that it came from a question and answer ceremony called a shosan, where the teacher sits in the middle of the zendo, and each student in turn does prostrations and then comes up and asks a question, very direct, personal, heartfelt question to the teacher, and the teacher answers it in turn. And obviously in a ceremony like that, when you have 40 or 50 students, the emotional tone of the ceremony can be, very varied. It can be very intense or very lighthearted. And I think it may be significant that of the records we have in the archive, Suzuki Roshi only did Shosan ceremonies at Tassajara, the training monastery. Perhaps he felt it was most appropriate for those students who were really going deeper into their practice. And so the student asked in the course of this ceremony, Roshi, how is it that we can feel we've lost our home, that we're making what we think is a journey to return to it? So we have this sense that we're coming from a place, a childhood home, a childhood region, some particular place that we've come from. And then some parts of us wants to go journeying, whether we call it way-seeking mind or something else, something we're trying to figure out that we feel we have to go and find. And Suzuki replies, your feeling is opposite. Maybe as in the imperfection of the language, we get a closer sense of what he means. Your feeling is opposite. You think you started your journey from home, but real home is here. And what do you think he meant by here? Did he mean Tassajara? Did he mean the zendo? Did he mean this present moment? Don't go wandering about to various countries. Now here he's, I think, quoting from Dogen's first published text, first written text. So Dogen, the Japanese founder of this lineage. And in the Fukan Zazengi, the universal recommendation for Zazen, he says, why leave behind the seat in your own home and go wandering in vain through the dusty realms of other lands? And I have to say, when I first heard that quote, I understood it entirely geographically, having come from England to San Francisco to practice. And in my first practice period at Tassajara, the Shuso, the head monk, was from Ireland, Ingan, who some of you know. And so in the question and answer ceremony that you have with the Shuso, which is very similar to the Shosan ceremony, I asked him, why do we leave behind the seat in our own home and wander in vain through the dusty realms of other lands? And he said, because we're deluded. So these days I don't think of that phrase as being entirely geographical. What is it that we go out looking for? Where do we find it? And so when the student goes on, why is it that we do this? Have this feeling that we have to journey to return to home. And Suzuki Roshi says, because you feel you started your journey from your home, which is not true home. You must feel as if you came back to your home right now. So in every moment, that feeling of coming back home. So when I say that, I picture opening the front door of my new house, my new home. Even though it's still full of unpacked boxes, also packed boxes which we're yet to unpack. And even though every time I wash my hands, I turn the wrong way to try to find the towel because I haven't taken that whole place into my body in that way where things become familiar. You must feel as if you came back to your home right now. So again, close your eyes and think about that feeling, coming back to your home right now. What does that look like for you? What visualization do you have for that? Come back to your home right now. And then as I was reflecting on this, I was also thinking about refuge. Refuge is a very important term in Buddhism. It's kind of deeply woven into our practice. And very literally, every stitch on our robes, we take refuge. Namo Kie Butsu, Namo Kie Ho, Namo Kie So. We take refuge in Buddha. We take refuge in Dharma. We take refuge in Sangha. So this triple treasure, as it's called, the three treasures, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, the teacher, the teaching, and the community, deeply woven into our practice. Buddhism rests on these three treasures. Even as I was doing my prostrations here, I was doing the practice that Linda Ruth encouraged us to do to form abbess at Tassajara, and taking refuge with each bow. So if you do 3 bows, you just take refuge one time. If we're doing 9 bows, as we do in morning service, you take triple refuge. And I pulled up the chant that we do in the morning. I take refuge in Buddha, before all beings, immersing body and mind deeply in the way, awakening true mind. So when we take refuge in Buddha, we're not doing it alone, we're doing it before all beings. It's always a practice we do with everybody else. Immersing body and mind deeply in the way. Awakening true mind. And what is this true mind? This thing we hear sometimes is the inmost request. You know, what is your inmost request? Paul is always asking that question. Is that deepest part of you, that true mind part of you, is that a true home? I take refuge in Dharma, before all beings, entering deeply the merciful ocean of Buddha's way. So this teaching that we listen to, this teaching that we read, this teaching that we practice, and the teaching that ultimately we completely embody, entering deeply the merciful ocean of Buddha's way. So this teaching that Buddha passed on, although, as he said, he didn't create it. He came from the teaching. The teaching is the truth of all things at all time. The changing and the unchanging alongside each other all the time. This world that we live in, this human life that we lead, this is the merciful ocean of Buddha's way. Practicing in the truth of that. I take refuge in Sangha, before all beings, bringing harmony to everyone, free from hindrance. So we can think about Sangha, the community, in different ways. We can think about the people in the room here. We can think about the people who practice a practice period together at Tassajara. We can think about everybody who is connected with Zen Center. Everybody who practices in one way or another in this country or around the world. Maybe we can think about everybody who is alive now and has been alive as the Sangha. This is the interconnection. When we think about bringing harmony to everyone free from hindrance, it's kind of a tall order, like those bodhisattva vows. And I was thinking that, the ancestral connection I feel to one particular part of England, when a lot of people have that feeling of ancestral connection, a lot of problems arise. A lot of suffering, as we see right now. An ancestral connection does not mean bringing harmony, but means pushing other people out to create space for one group, not another. So how can we bring harmony to these situations? And thinking about taking refuge in Sangha, I'll go back to being at Great Vow Monastery a couple of weeks ago. This was for a gathering of what we call the Gen X teachers. So Buddhism largely came to the West in the 50s and 60s, and what we call the pioneer generation, or if you, in the more vernacular, the boomer generation, were the people who brought and expanded Buddhism in the West. And now, as I said, people are retiring, dying, moving on. And the keys have been handed over to the Gen X generation, including Abbot David, Abbot Mako, Abbot Jiryu. And this group has been meeting every couple of years since 2011. And I've been going to the meetings since 2013. And of course, in that time, we've aged ourselves. We've gone from being the scrappy upstarts to being the people in responsibility. And now we start to think about how we hand on to the next generations. But the wonderful thing about the Gen X Teachers Gathering is it's, I think the word is ecumenical. It's all schools of Buddhism are invited and represented. Theravadins, Mahayanas, Vajrayanas, and Ekayanas. Everybody, as long as they're teaching, and as long as they fit the age criteria, is welcome to come and join us. And it's a wonderful learning experience. And I think part of the power of it is that it's a community of people who have taken refuge and can meet each other in those ways. The sense of taking refuge in Sangha. And I was helping to organize this conference, which actually meant I didn't get to enjoy it as much as I usually do, because I was running around trying to make sure that everything happened smoothly. And one of the other organizers, Jomon Martin at Great Vow, I know, had to give a talk the day the conference ended. And I think she based her talk on the guidelines that we came up with. Now, for any community to meet harmoniously, then you need certain guidelines. The Buddha established rules and regulations as they were needed. And so, as an organizing committee, we looked at all the other guidelines that had been kind of put together in the previous conferences and said, okay, we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. There are some certain themes that most of the guidelines fall under. So I just want to read these as part of thinking how we bring harmony to everyone in Sangha. Take refuge in Sangha. So the first is affirm the connection between all of us. So even though we all show up in different lineages and different experiences and different bodies, different life experiences, we are all connected. The second one is an invitation to be vulnerable with each other. And for me, this is one of the powers and the incredible benefits of a practice community, where you can meet in trust and confidence, and be vulnerable with each other. Be honest, be authentic. You don't have to put up a front. You don't have to pretend to be doing things you're not. You get to really express. I'm always conscious of hand gestures, and it's that hand gesture like right from the heart. Express right from the heart who you are. And it takes a certain vulnerability to do that. But in a practice community, that's what we practice together. Maintain individual and collective awareness. So it's easy to tune out, and forget the things that we're doing and just fall into old patterns and old habits. So always remembering to maintain it. Balance voices. Because we know historically certain populations, in which I can hold up my hand and say, I belong to most of them, tend to dominate conversations, tend to assume authority, tend to assume a sense of knowledge, power. So how can we make sure that other voices get heard? People who don't historically have the opportunity to be heard, to be listened to, and to be met. When conflict arises, seek to understand. We had some very powerful conversations where people from different backgrounds and different upbringings were sharing their experiences, which, sounded to be at odds. But that energy can be helpful. I don't know, historically, people say, well, at Zen Center, you don't really have a lot of conflict. Maybe we need more conflict. Just to be honest and express yourself, and to know that it is held within the community. Use everything as practice. So practice is not just sitting on the cushion. It's not just chopping vegetables in the kitchen. It's not sweeping the temple steps. Everything is practice. So I think that's what taking refuge in Sangha can look like. How are we doing for time, Ino-san? I'm just thinking. 10:44. 10:44, good. I don't like speaking for a long, long time because I know people's concentration flags. And I'm always happy to take questions, so if we have time for questions at the end, I will certainly welcome them. So I had many other things that I'd written down here, and I knew that having been at this conference a couple of weeks ago and then moving house, that maybe the talk wouldn't hold together as much as I would like to, or it may feel a little undercooked. I want to finish with one thing. So when I think about the summer solstice, and I know that we have solstice ceremonies here to mark the turning of the seasons, I always think of the moment in The Great Gatsby, F. Scott Fitzgerald's novel, where Daisy Buchanan, the kind of rich character, says, "Do you always watch for the longest day of the year and then miss it? I always watch for the longest day in the year and then miss it." And I always read that as being, a kind of an indictment of the heedlessness of the life of that rich generation in the 1920s. But then really, are we any less heedless now? And I'm sure you're familiar with the Earthrise photograph that was taken from the spaceship in, I think, 1968, showing our planet, a little blue marbled disk far away. And the astronaut who took that picture has just died, so it kind of came back up again. And I know at the time, it was an incredibly powerful image and changed people's idea of our home. Instead of thinking of a house, instead of thinking of a town, instead of thinking as a country, that really we have this one little planet, blue planet, that we all share. And this is our home. So I was going to conclude by saying, maybe the present moment is our home. And yes, the present moment is our home. We can't rely on any other form of home. Homes get sold, homes get destroyed, homes get devastated by war. So we have the present moment as our home. Maybe we have our practice as our home. Practice of understanding that everything changes and not being terrified by that thought. To be able to sit with that, to be able to bear it, and bear it together in community. But ultimately, this planet is our home. And what can we do in our lives to take care of it and each other? Roshi, how has it come about that we can feel we've lost our home and make what we think is a journey to return to it? Well, your feeling is opposite. You think you started your journey from home, but real home is here. Don't go wandering about to various countries. Why is it that we do that? Because you feel you started your journey from your home, which is not true home. So I invite you all to reflect on your true home. Thank you.
So we have time for questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and I will bring the microphone over to you.
Thank you, Shundo, for your talk. I really appreciated what you said about living in Sangha and how to bring about harmony. And I was going to ask, maybe as a person who tends to, in Sangha, like when there's like a dominating presence or somebody who's more maybe comfortable with their authority or whatever it might be, as someone who kind of shrinks down and backs down, kind of what are some skillful ways that you might recommend to, empower oneself or to kind of meet that, that the way that some people might be in a way that might be helpful or encouraging for them, and also to empower oneself?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. As I say, I'm a member of intersecting dominant groups, so it's very hard for me to answer that question because, the natural tendency will be for me to be in that position of comfort. So part of it is knowing that it's, for people like me to step back. There's a stepping back and stepping forward, or moving back and moving forward. I think the first thing is just understanding that dynamic. For the people, in whatever positions they are, to understand that the dynamic is not everyone feels comfortable speaking up, not everyone feels safe to say what's real for them. I had that experience in my family dynamic, certainly, but it took a long time for me to understand, and especially, this is one of the benefits of coming to live at Zen Center, to understand that there was a non-judgmental space that was available in order to speak, and if you spoke wrongly or acted wrongly, that the feedback would be, coming from a place of kindness and compassion. Because, we are practicing for kindness, compassion, and love. If we're not practicing for that, what are we practicing for? I haven't answered your question yet. I'm trying to think. I think trust. There's a feeling. And I say this is a strong introvert. A feeling of anxiety about expressing. And I remember, when I was Kokyo for the first time leading the chants, like I was worried about my voice. Literally worried about being able to open my mouth fully and express myself fully. And what made that possible, apart from some great feedback from Tia, who was the Tanto at the time, was knowing that it wasn't just me. I wasn't just saying this stuff. I was reading the chant book. It was the words of the Dharma were coming through me. And so it's taking myself out of the equation, in a sense. So even though we're, in the kind of things you were talking about, where we occupy particular positions, at the same time, you can step aside, the mental worry and frustration, the physical tightness. Can you put that aside in the moment and just trust that what you have to say is the Dharma in that moment, even if it's an imperfect Dharma? Does that help, or would you like?
Yeah, maybe like a follow-up thing for that is like, I don't know, like for you, I wouldn't say like for you, specifically you, but like in a general sense of like what would feel helpful in a moment when someone is, what would feel like helpful to hear in terms of like a feedback, if I were to say, hey, you're not hearing me or something like that, what are skillful ways to, for a person, I don't know, what I'm trying to say is like what would be like easier for someone to hear about whatever dominating way they might be, to kind of be kind about that? What would be kind to you?
I think the phrase that comes up for me is, perhaps we could hear some other perspectives on this. So it's not just about, you're talking too much, so I'm trying not to point at anybody who want to do that. Not you're talking too much, but perhaps we could hear some other perspectives on this. Do other people have other experiences? Because this is, again, this is something that we have to be reminded of, that not everyone thinks the way that we do. Even in a community of people who are practicing together and doing the same thing, people have extremely different experiences and understandings. And so it's just good to remember that. And when we don't remember it ourselves, to be reminded of it. Well, you know, you experienced that, but I'm experiencing this slightly differently, and perhaps other people have other experiences too. And as a general rule, you know, you can always start from an I statement as well, rather than like, you're doing this thing. It's like, I'm feeling that the whole story isn't coming out here, or I feel that other people might have something valuable to contribute. Yeah.
Thank you.
Another question?
Thank you for your talk. I think one thing I've been turning, because it appeared in a different religion that I practice as well, is this term merciful. So in this context of taking refuge in Dharma, I'm now forgetting the line that it appears in, the merciful ocean. And so, yeah, I was curious what your take is in that context of merciful. How is it merciful?
Thank you. It was interesting because when I read that, that word actually jumped out at me. I thought, should I comment on this? And then I didn't. But one thing that came to mind was a line in the ordination ceremony. And I don't know if the line is in the same form now. I think it might have actually been changed, but I remember it as, this is the path of mercy for all beings and things. Is that right, David? Yeah. And I don't know that I could attempt a definition of mercy, but it's a sense of I don't know, you know, it's kind of forgiveness, opening, allowing. You know, there's an idea of grace that comes in there as well. And for me, it boils I mean, it doesn't boil down to it. It goes all the way back to the Four Noble Truths. You know, it's like if we take that understanding that there is suffering and there is a way to end suffering, how merciful is that? You know, you can end suffering by doing these practices, by taking on these things. That, you know, my trust and faith in this practice is that people who do embody that practice tend to manifest in ways that feel kind and compassionate. And that is a merciful thing for themselves and for everybody else. You know, because when you do that, you know, you impact other people in ways that, you know, you may not be fully aware of. But this sense of, grace and understanding and compassion, I think, is what comes up for me. Does that speak to you a little bit?
It does, yeah. For me, what I was exploring is the sense that everything is for practice, everything's for teaching, especially in taking refuge in Dharma. And that seems very merciful. But yeah, I really appreciate this perspective. Thank you.
Another question?
Thank you, and thanks for your talk. I don't know how I'm going to make this a question, but I'm going to try. So I live in Sonoma, and I come down here, and I just spent a week in Tassajara thinking about home, thinking about my spiritual home and where I belong and where I fit. And I found myself attached to this place. Yet it's an hour away, it's hard to get here, I can only get here, you know, and there are other places that I practice, so I feel like I'm cobbling together a spiritual home. And I think my overall question is, how do I create home with getting attached to a place? Yet, you know, I come here for the ideas, I come here for the dialogue, I come here for so much. It's hard not to get attached to this idea of the Zen Center, City Center. So I'm not sure I know how to cobble something together without getting attached to it. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does, yeah. There was a part in my talk where I was thinking about a story that Tenshin Roshi, during a practice period at Tassajara, during question and answer session, one of his priests started kind of addressing him, and Tenshin Roshi immediately jumped back, "You're nesting." And this concept of, we can take refuge in something, but if we start nesting in it, if we start thinking, oh, I can build myself a cozy little thing where I can hide from everybody, then that's not, the true sense of taking refuge. It's not the true sense of home. And, because our practice is not, one teaching, it's not one particular thing, like here's the teaching right here. Because it is, everything is practice, we might find a wish to kind of concretize things, or or kind of nest in something, and then we find we're stuck. But we can still, we can be touching things and connecting with things on the understanding that they're always changing. And this is the point, like the practice in this temple will go on for the rest of the year, even if we're not in this space, and the home you feel may feel like 6 different places all at once. But, maybe that's a web within which, you feel held and supported. But through which you can also move when things change. And this is maybe, maybe it's the hard part of the practice or the skillful part of the practice. Like, when the thing that you love changes, how do you relate to it? You're like, no, I like that version better. Let me hold on to this version. And so that's where the kind of the true home in this moment, becomes most real and, most tasty, I think. And so, my personal, if I think of a true home in a location, it's like it's not somewhere I've ever lived for a long time, but it's there in me, and when I'm there, I connect with it, and that connection is beautiful. And then when I'm somewhere else, when I'm at Tassajara, I feel at home at Tassajara, and that connection is beautiful. But I don't get to be there all the time, and I don't expect it to be exactly the same every time. But just to enjoy it when it is, when those two things meet, and find the strength in that, and just know that, there's still, those things are still supporting you, those places are still supporting you, even if you're not there. Maybe that would be the best I can do.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, Shundo, thank you very much.
Yeah.